They say every fairy tale has its dark side, but what happens when the darkness comes from someone you trusted the most? Imagine the person you've devoted your life to, shared every intimate moment with, and believed would never betray you. What if that trust was shattered in the most unimaginable way? Prince Harry, a man who has spent years trying to navigate the pressures of royal life, has finally confirmed what insiders have whispered about for years. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. And the truth is far more shocking than anyone could have imagined. It's a revelation that shakes the foundations of his marriage, tarnishes a public image carefully cultivated for decades, and sends ripples across the globe. The woman he married, the one the world has watched and adored, allegedly carried on a series of secret encounters with someone whose role was supposed to be nothing more than protection and loyalty, her bodyguard, caught multiple times. The details, the implications, and the emotional fallout are all just beginning to surface. The palace, with its centuries of tradition and secrecy, has always tried to present an image of perfection. Weddings are fairy tales. Family gatherings are meticulously orchestrated for public admiration. Every public appearance is choreographed to convey unity, harmony, and devotion. But behind these velvet-draped doors, the truth often tells a far different story. A story of betrayal, deception, and secret liaisons that the world was never meant to see. And in this case, it's a story that begins not with a scandal, but with a sense of disbelief. Because when Prince Harry speaks, the world listens. And what he confirmed will leave even the most skeptical observers reeling. Think about it. You live your life under constant scrutiny. Every smile, every hand gesture, every public interaction is analyzed, dissected, and broadcast to millions. How do you process betrayal when not only is it intimate and personal, but it happens in a world where the eyes of the entire planet are upon you? Prince Harry's confirmation doesn't just reveal infidelity. It exposes layers of secrecy, manipulation, and public performance that make ordinary affairs pale in comparison. Imagine finding out that someone who was supposed to safeguard your life, someone entrusted with your protection, became complicit in a betrayal that was repeated, intimate, and meticulously hidden. But why now? Why has Prince Harry chosen to speak, and why does it matter at this exact moment? Timing, in stories like this, is everything. The revelation comes amidst a maelstrom of public speculation, media scrutiny, and a global fascination with the monarchy that shows no signs of waning. The palace has had decades to manage appearances, spin narratives, and maintain an image of composure. Yet, even in a system built on control, one truth remains uncontrollable. The human heart, when betrayed, has a way of speaking loudly. And when the man at the center of the story confirms what rumors have long suggested, everything changes. Before diving into the details, consider this. What does it mean for the world to finally see the cracks in what seemed like a flawless facade? How do we reconcile the image of a devoted couple with the reality of repeated betrayal? What does it say about loyalty, secrecy, and the lengths people go to protect appearances? These questions don't just hover in the air, they demand answers. And over the next hour, you're going to witness those answers unfold in ways that are both shocking and profoundly human. Imagine Harry's perspective. Living in a gilded cage of royal expectation, every decision, every word, every glance weighed against centuries of tradition. And yet, personal life is supposed to be private, sacred, immune from the scrutiny of millions. The revelation of intimate encounters with someone outside the marriage isn't just a personal betrayal. It's a public humiliation amplified by every camera, microphone, and journalist eager for the next headline. Every text, every secret meeting, every hidden glance became a puzzle Harry had to piece together, often alone, often in disbelief, often with the weight of the monarchy on his shoulders. But let's pause for a moment. Think about the bodyguard, tasked with protecting, trained to remain loyal, sworn to confidentiality. What circumstances could lead someone in such a position to cross a line so intimate, so explosive, that it threatens to destroy a marriage and unsettle a family? And what does it say about the human heart, about desire, about the power of secrecy, that even those closest to us can become instruments of our undoing? These are questions the palace has grappled with in whispers, questions the media has speculated about for years, and questions that Prince Harry is now answering, with a raw honesty that leaves no room for denial. Now, you might be wondering, how could such encounters be caught multiple times and yet remain hidden from public view? The answer lies in a combination of privilege, secrecy, and meticulous planning. We live in a world where public perception is everything, and for those within the palace walls, appearances often outweigh truth. Yet the cracks are never fully sealed. Small signs, unusual behaviors, whispered rumors. They exist, waiting for someone courageous, someone emotionally invested, to notice. And that someone, in this case, is Harry. Consider the emotional weight of this discovery. Imagine the first time he saw evidence that was undeniable. The shock, the anger, the heartbreak. Imagine piecing together moments that had previously seemed innocuous, now reframed in the light of betrayal. Every smile, every excuse, every late-night absence suddenly gains new meaning. And with each revelation, the personal stakes grow higher, because this is no longer a matter of speculation or rumor. It's confirmed reality, and the confirmation comes from someone whose credibility cannot be questioned. As we prepare to dive into the story, remember this. This isn't just about scandal. It's about the human condition, about trust, deception, and the lengths to which people will go to protect themselves while betraying those closest to them. It's about public image versus private reality, about the chasm between perception and truth. And most importantly, it's about consequences for those who betray, for those who are betrayed, and for everyone caught in the ripple effect of such revelations. By the end of this journey, you'll have witnessed the full scope of what was hidden for so long. You'll understand the emotional stakes, the palace dynamics, the secret encounters, and the personal toll of betrayal on someone who lives under constant scrutiny. And yet, even as we begin to uncover these truths, one question remains. What happens when the truth finally comes out? How does the world, the media, and the public reconcile the image of someone beloved with the reality of their actions? And most importantly, how does Harry navigate the aftermath of a revelation that shakes not only his marriage, but the very institution he was born into? But here's where it gets truly chilling. What Harry revealed next wasn't just about betrayal or a single lapse in judgment. It exposed a pattern, a series of events so intimate and repeated that it couldn't simply be explained away. And what he uncovered about the people around him, the allies, the enablers, the silent witnesses, added layers of complexity, danger, and emotional weight that no one could have anticipated. Have you ever looked at someone and thought you knew them completely, only to realize that everything you believed was built on illusions? That's exactly where Prince Harry found himself. For years, the world had admired what appeared to be the perfect couple. Their smiles, their public gestures, the way they moved together. It all told a story of unity, devotion, and love. Every red carpet, every charity event, every public appearance seemed flawless, as though choreographed by some invisible hand, ensuring the image of perfection never faltered. But perfection is fragile. And in this story, it was nothing more than a carefully maintained facade. The palace has always excelled at creating illusions. Centuries of tradition have taught them how to mask conflict, how to control narrative, how to make the public see exactly what they want them to see. Smiles are measured. Handshakes are rehearsed. Even casual glances are scrutinized and curated for maximum impression. But behind closed doors, the reality often tells a different story. Families, no matter how wealthy, powerful, or influential, are not immune to betrayal, tension, or secrets. And in Harry's case, the cracks were starting to show, even before the revelations that would shake the world. It began subtly. Small signs, easily dismissed by the untrained eye. A whispered phone call in the middle of the night. A text message that vanished too quickly. A glance that lingered a second too long. On the surface, nothing alarming, nothing concrete. But Harry, living in a world where every detail is magnified, could feel when something was off. It's a feeling that gnaws at the mind, a persistent intuition that something isn't right, no matter how hard you try to convince yourself otherwise. And he wasn't alone in sensing it. Those closest to him, trusted allies, had noticed anomalies too. But the palace has rules. Speak too loudly and you risk chaos. Stay silent, and the truth festers beneath the surface. Think about it from Harry's perspective. Growing up under scrutiny is not like ordinary life. Every decision, every emotion is under a microscope. Mistakes are amplified. Missteps become headlines. And in that pressure cooker, the betrayal cuts deeper, sharper. Imagine discovering that someone you loved, someone you shared the most intimate moments with, had been deceiving you repeatedly, and worse, with someone who was supposed to be loyal to you. The shock isn't just emotional, it's existential. It shakes your very understanding of reality. And yet, the public saw none of this. They saw two people in love, smiling for cameras, making gestures that seemed perfect in every way. How do you reconcile the perception of perfection with the reality of secret encounters? How does one process a life where truth and image diverge so completely? Harry's world was built on appearances, but the private reality was unraveling fast. Early on, the signs were easy to dismiss, or so it seemed. Maybe it was stress. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was simply the pressure of public life. But the patterns grew undeniable. Meetings that should have been routine became suspicious. Laughter that seemed forced. Absences that couldn't be explained. And when these moments accumulated, a picture began to emerge. A picture Harry could no longer ignore. Ask yourself this. What would you do if you began to see the pattern? Would you confront it immediately? Would you gather evidence? Or would you hope it's just a misunderstanding, something you could overlook until normalcy returns? Harry faced this exact dilemma. His instincts screamed one thing. His mind tried to rationalize another. And in that tension, the perfect facade began to crumble. The public image was flawless, but the cracks were undeniable behind the scenes. Those close to the couple noticed subtle changes in behavior, moments of tension that didn't align with the public narrative. Staff whispered about odd schedules, whispered phone calls, and evasive answers. Even trusted friends noted that things weren't right, though no one could put their finger on the truth. Rumors floated through corridors, often dismissed as paranoia or palace intrigue. But Harry knew better. He could feel it in the way schedules were manipulated, in the way excuses were too polished, in the way smiles never quite reached the eyes. And then there were the moments that were impossible to ignore, times when the secrecy became too blatant. Texts sent in haste, meetings that were suddenly private, glances exchanged that held a weight far beyond casual conversation. Every small anomaly was a thread, and Harry, whether consciously or subconsciously, began to pull at it, unraveling the tapestry that had held up the illusion of a perfect marriage. It's easy to underestimate the power of perception. People see what they want to see. They believe in the stories presented to them. And for the world, Harry and his wife were the picture of modern royalty, glamorous, philanthropic, united. Every carefully captured photo, every orchestrated event reinforced that belief. But perception is not truth. And as Harry would soon discover, truth has a way of forcing itself into the light, no matter how much effort goes into hiding it. The facade was not just maintained for the public, it was maintained for the palace itself. Tradition dictates restraint, control, and composure. Scandals are whispered about, but rarely confirmed. Public loyalty is paramount, even when private loyalty has eroded. And yet, in private, the world can be messy, emotional, and unpredictable. People are flawed. Relationships are complex. Trust is fragile. And once broken, it sends ripples that touch everything, everyone, and everywhere. But even knowing all this, nothing could have prepared Harry for the confirmation that would come. Not just the confirmation of betrayal, but the revelation that it wasn't a one-time lapse, not a fleeting mistake. It was a series of intimate encounters, repeated, deliberate, and hidden, with someone whose role was meant to be entirely devoted to protection, loyalty, and service. The shock, the disbelief, and the emotional weight were staggering. And here's what makes this story even more astonishing. While the public remained enamored by appearances, Harry was piecing together a reality that was far more complicated, far more emotional, and far more painful than anyone could imagine. The perfect facade was a lie, and every moment spent believing it had been a lie layered on top of heartbreak. Imagine seeing it. Not just the betrayal itself, but the patterns, the repetition, the subtle signs that led up to it. The small things you ignored, the moments you brushed off, suddenly coalescing into undeniable evidence. How would you react? Shock, anger, rage, or something deeper, something more painful? The realization that your entire understanding of a person, a relationship, a life, had been built on illusions? And yet, amidst all the heartbreak, there's an element of awe. The complexity of human behavior, the layers of secrecy, the lengths people go to hide their desires. And in Harry's story, that complexity is magnified 1,000-fold, because it involves not just private lives but public scrutiny, centuries of tradition, and the expectations of millions around the world. So, as the facade began to crack, Harry's journey toward understanding, confrontation, and ultimately confirmation began. He saw the signs. He questioned the motives. He gathered fragments of evidence. And slowly, painfully, he realized that the perfect marriage the world admired was built on a house of cards, ready to collapse. But here's the chilling truth. Even when the cards start to fall, the world outside doesn't see the collapse. They see smiles. They see public appearances. They see perfection. And only those brave enough to look closer, to peel back the layers, discover the truth lurking underneath. And so, Harry found himself standing at the edge of revelation. The facade had cracked, the pattern was undeniable, and the next step was unavoidable. Confrontation, truth, exposure, all were imminent. Every instinct, every emotional impulse screamed that the moment of confirmation was near. And yet, the outcome was uncertain, the fallout unpredictable, and the world oblivious. Have you ever trusted someone implicitly, only to realize that trust could be the most dangerous vulnerability in your life? That's exactly the position Harry found himself in. And at the center of this storm was someone who had been a fixture in their lives for years, the bodyguard, tasked with protection, sworn to loyalty, and trained to be nearly invisible. He was the last person anyone would suspect. But as Harry would soon learn, appearances can be deceiving, and the people closest to you are often capable of shocking betrayal. From the outside, a bodyguard seems like an extension of the person they protect. They blend into the background, always vigilant, always alert. They anticipate danger before anyone else does. Their presence is silent yet constant. The public rarely notices them, yet they are a critical component of safety, especially in a world where every royal move is monitored. But the irony, in this case, is chilling. The very person sworn to shield a life became the instrument of its emotional devastation. Think about it. If someone you trusted with your safety and your secrets was hiding an agenda, how would you even begin to notice it? Would subtle signs alert you, or would it only become apparent when it was too late? In Harry's situation, the warning signs were there all along. Small gestures, fleeting glances, interactions that didn't fit the ordinary pattern of a professional relationship. On their own, they might have been dismissed. But over time, the threads began to weave a narrative that couldn't be ignored. And what makes this even more extraordinary is the audacity, the repeated nature of the encounters. This wasn't a one-time mistake or a fleeting lapse in judgment. It was a pattern, deliberate and repeated, conducted under the nose of someone who had every reason to feel secure. It's a type of betrayal that cuts differently than a single mistake. It's methodical, intimate, and profoundly personal. Imagine discovering that someone you relied on not only had access to your private life, but was actively undermining it. How would that make you feel? Vulnerable? Exposed? Angry? All of those and more. And Harry, navigating this revelation, had to balance his emotions against the very real need for discretion. In the royal world, one misstep can become a global spectacle. Yet the truth, especially one as explosive as this, has a way of asserting itself regardless of consequences. Consider the logistics. How do repeated intimate encounters occur without detection in a life that's constantly monitored? The answer lies in subtlety, in secrecy, and in human behavior. People can hide intentions behind smiles, behind courteous gestures, behind the carefully maintained roles they play. The bodyguard, in this instance, had mastered the art of blending in while exploiting proximity. And Harry, despite the constant vigilance required of his position, began to see patterns that suggested something far beyond casual missteps. There were moments that seemed ordinary at first, but under scrutiny revealed alarming details. private conversations that lasted longer than necessary, phone calls that were hurriedly ended when others approached, familiar excuses that became increasingly implausible. Every detail, when pieced together, painted a picture that was impossible to ignore. It wasn't paranoia, it was evidence, subtle but undeniable. Ask yourself this. If someone you trusted implicitly began to break that trust in the quietest, most intimate ways, would you notice before it was too late? And if you did, how would you confront it? In Harry's case, the confrontation was inevitable, but the process of getting there was torturous, both emotionally and mentally. And then there were the whispers. Within the palace walls, rumors began to circulate. Staff who had worked closely with the couple started noticing behaviors that didn't align with professional boundaries. Odd schedules, unexplained absences, tension between individuals who should have been cordial. At first, these whispers were dismissed. Everyone has a story about palace intrigue, after all. But Harry, attuned to patterns and inconsistencies, began connecting the dots in ways that others could not. It's important to understand the stakes. This wasn't just about infidelity. It was about trust, protection, and the invasion of the private world that Harry had tried to keep separate from the public eye. The bodyguard's role was intimate in a professional sense. Close proximity, constant presence, awareness of vulnerabilities. But that proximity became a conduit for betrayal. And when Harry pieced together the timeline, the repeated encounters, and the subtle manipulations, the depth of the deception was staggering. Now consider the psychological impact. Realizing that someone you rely on for safety is betraying you shakes your core. Every interaction becomes suspect. Every gesture, every word, every seemingly benign action is scrutinized for hidden meaning. Trust, once shattered, leaves an emotional void that is hard to fill. Harry had to navigate not just anger or hurt, but the profound disorientation of seeing the world he thought he knew crumble around him. And then came the evidence that couldn't be ignored. Text messages, subtle inconsistencies in stories, observations from others, all converged to form a picture that was undeniable. The repeated nature of the encounters was clear. The betrayal was intimate. The emotional impact was devastating. And while the public remained unaware, Harry had reached a point of clarity. The perfect facade was gone, and the truth could no longer be contained. But here's the most startling aspect. The bodyguard wasn't acting alone in maintaining the illusion. There were enablers, silent witnesses, and those who turned a blind eye. Every organization, every institution has its blind spots. In this case, those blind spots provided cover for repeated betrayals, allowing the facade to persist longer than it should have. And Harry, discovering this web of complicity, had to navigate a minefield of emotional, ethical, and political complexity. Ask yourself again. What would you do if the person you trusted the most, someone integral to your safety and your life, became a source of heartbreak? How would you confront it? Who could you trust after that? And most importantly, how would you process a betrayal so intimate, repeated, and concealed, in a world where every action is magnified 1,000-fold? Harry's journey wasn't just about discovery. It was about emotional survival, piecing together the timeline, understanding the motives, determining who could be confronted and when, and all the while, managing the public image that remained blissfully unaware of the storm brewing behind palace doors. Every day was a balancing act between personal anguish and public expectation. And yet, in the midst of all this, there were moments that revealed the human element of this tragedy. Moments of disbelief, moments of anger, moments when Harry had to question not just the fidelity of his partner, but the loyalty of everyone around him. And in those moments, he realized a fundamental truth. Betrayal isn't just about the act itself. It's about the ripple effects it sends through every relationship, every trust, every sense of security. The bodyguard's betrayal was intimate, calculated, and repeated. But the emotional devastation it caused was far greater than the sum of the acts themselves. Trust shattered, privacy violated, emotions manipulated. And yet, despite all this, Harry's next move would be even more shocking, because it wasn't just about exposing a betrayal. It was about revealing a truth the world wasn't ready to see. And as the pieces fell into place, a realization struck Harry. This story was bigger than personal heartbreak. It had implications for the palace, for the monarchy, and for every carefully maintained public image. The facade wasn't just cracked, it was at risk of collapse entirely. And the world, blissfully unaware, was about to witness a scandal that would redefine what people thought they knew. Have you ever had that sinking feeling, the one that gnaws at the back of your mind, whispering that something is terribly wrong, even when all the evidence is circumstantial? That's exactly where Harry found himself in the weeks leading up to the confirmation. It wasn't a single event that tipped him off. It was a mosaic of subtle cues, fleeting inconsistencies, and behavior that didn't fit the picture of the marriage he thought he knew. Every detail mattered, every small observation carried weight, and every instinct screamed that the facade was hiding a truth he was not yet ready to face. The first suspicions began innocuously enough. A glance held a second too long. A conversation that seemed innocuous at first, but when replayed in his mind later, felt laden with hidden meaning. A schedule shift that seemed minor but disrupted the rhythm of their daily life. On their own, these moments might have been shrugged off. But Harry, trained by years of observing and reading people in high-stakes situations, sensed that these anomalies weren't random. They were deliberate. They were part of a story that had been unfolding in secret, right under his nose. And it's important to understand the psychological impact of this. Suspicion is a double-edged sword. It awakens vigilance, but also paranoia. It forces you to scrutinize every detail, question every gesture, and dissect every interaction. Harry, who had always been fiercely protective of those he loved and deeply intuitive about human behavior, could feel the puzzle pieces shifting beneath his fingertips. He began noticing patterns, subtle repetitions that others dismissed or overlooked. And as those patterns became undeniable, the weight of realization began to press down on him. Consider this. When someone you love starts acting differently, when their actions no longer align with words, what do? Do you confront immediately, risk the emotional explosion, or do you observe, gather evidence, and wait for the right moment? Harry chose the latter. But waiting was agony. Every day he watched, analyzed, and mentally retraced moments that now seemed tainted with deceit. Every interaction became a test, every smile potentially masking something darker. And with each passing moment, the picture grew clearer and more devastating. What really tipped him off were the interactions that should have been private but weren't. Moments meant to be intimate, personal, and safe, observed and recorded not by him, but by subtle clues left behind. A misplaced text, a misdirected glance, a casual comment from someone else. These fragments, scattered and seemingly inconsequential at first, began to form a narrative that was impossible to ignore. Harry started connecting dots he hadn't even realized were there, building a timeline of deceit that was both meticulous and intimate. And yet, he couldn't confront it immediately. The palace world operates on layers of complexity. Confrontation is not just emotional. It has political ramifications, implications for staff, public perception, and family dynamics. Every action must be weighed, every word considered. Harry, aware of this, had to navigate not just personal betrayal, but a web of public and private consequences. Every step forward risked exposure, scandal, or backlash. And yet, staying silent was no longer an option. The truth demanded acknowledgement. Think about the human element here. Suspicion breeds emotional turbulence. Doubt gnaws at your confidence. Anger simmers beneath the surface. And then comes the gut-wrenching moment of recognizing a pattern of behavior that confirms what you feared. Harry experienced it all: disbelief, heartbreak, rage, and a deep sense of violation. This wasn't just about infidelity. It was about a repeated betrayal with someone who was supposed to be loyal, someone whose very presence was meant to safeguard, not undermine. The first suspicions were subtle, almost easy to dismiss if you weren't paying attention. A call ended too abruptly. A laugh that didn't reach the eyes. A gesture that seemed ordinary, but when examined in context, revealed layers of duplicity. Every day, Harry saw more evidence, each fragment reinforcing the picture that had been forming quietly for months. The pattern was there. The deception was deliberate, and it was intimate. Now consider the mental strain. Imagine living every day under the scrutiny of the public while piecing together a private betrayal. Every smile in public, every handshake, every photo taken and broadcast globally. Harry had to maintain composure while internally his world was unraveling. How do you process that? How do you reconcile loyalty, love, and duty with betrayal that is methodical, repeated, and intimate? The answers aren't simple. The emotional burden is immense. And it wasn't just intuition anymore. Specific incidents began surfacing, moments that could not be ignored. Times when proximity and opportunity aligned perfectly for the betrayal to occur. The repeated encounters were not haphazard. They were orchestrated, deliberate, and skillful. The evidence was subtle but accumulative, forming a mosaic of truth that was impossible to deny. At the same time, Harry had to deal with the internal conflict, wanting to believe the best of the person he loved versus acknowledging the mounting evidence. It's a psychological tug-of-war that leaves you questioning everything: your judgment, your perception, your memories. He gathered fragments, aligning them like puzzle pieces, ensuring that when the moment of confrontation came, he would not be acting on speculation alone. This period of careful observation was emotionally exhausting, mentally taxing, and deeply painful. But it was necessary, because in the world he inhabited, actions taken without proof could have devastating consequences, not just personally but publicly. Ask yourself this: what would you do in a situation like this? How would you balance love, loyalty, and the need for truth? How would you protect yourself while still navigating the expectations of a global audience that assumes you live a fairy tale life? Harry's situation is extreme, yes, but the emotional dynamics are universal. Suspicion, betrayal, and the quest for clarity are human experiences magnified 1,000-fold when they intersect with fame, wealth, and power. As the days turned into weeks, the clarity of the pattern became undeniable. Every anomaly, every whispered conversation, every hidden detail contributed to a picture that was impossible to ignore. Harry's first suspicions had matured into near certainty. And with that certainty came a new set of challenges: how to confront, how to confirm, how to process the emotional fallout, and how to navigate the reality that the person he trusted most had repeatedly violated that trust. But just when Harry thought he had mapped the extent of the betrayal, a revelation came that no one could have predicted. A detail, subtle yet explosive, that connected disparate pieces of evidence and confirmed the unimaginable. It wasn't just infidelity. It was repeated, intimate, and intentional. And the realization of this truth would set the stage for confrontation, exposure, and a scandal that would reverberate far beyond the palace walls. Because here's the thing: suspicion alone is one thing. Confirmation is another. And what Harry was about to face wasn't just emotional devastation. It was the knowledge that the perfect facade had been hiding a reality that was far more dangerous, far more intimate, and far more explosive than anyone could have imagined. And as he prepared to confront the truth, one question loomed over everything. What happens when the person you trust the most, the one closest to your heart, becomes the center of a betrayal so profound that it threatens not just your emotions, but your entire understanding of reality? What Harry uncovered next would not just confirm his worst fears. It would expose a scandal so intricate, so intimate, and so shocking that it would leave everyone questioning everything they thought they knew about love, loyalty, and the life behind the palace gates. Have you ever wondered how many secrets can hide behind the facade of normalcy? The answer, Harry was learning, is more than you could possibly imagine. The repeated betrayals he discovered weren't subtle or accidental. They were deliberate, intimate, and executed with a precision that left no room for mistake. Every time he thought he had caught a break, another revelation emerged, another encounter came to light, and the layers of deceit seemed endless. This was no fleeting lapse. It was a pattern, repeated with audacity and skill. The first undeniable evidence came in a way that was both ordinary and extraordinary. A chance observation, a misplaced item, a message that was never meant to be seen. These fragments, small on their own, began to build a damning picture when placed together. Harry, accustomed to reading patterns and behaviors, could not ignore the implications. The betrayal wasn't isolated, it was recurring. And with each recurrence, the emotional weight grew heavier. Imagine the emotional roller coaster. Suspicion gives way to doubt, doubt to recognition, recognition to heartbreak. Harry experienced it all. Every day, Moments that had seemed innocuous now carried hidden significance. Every smile, every absence, every conversation replayed itself in his mind with newfound meaning. And with each revelation, he felt the world he knew shifting beneath him, the foundation of trust cracking in ways that were both personal and profoundly public. The repeated nature of the encounters created an almost unbearable tension. It wasn't just the act itself, it was the intentionality behind it, the knowledge that these encounters were orchestrated in secret, with a careful awareness of opportunity and concealment. The audacity of it. The sheer nerve of conducting intimate meetings under the pretense of loyalty was staggering, and Harry, who had spent years navigating the complexities of royal life, found himself unprepared for the raw emotional impact. Let's talk about the logistics. How do repeated betrayals occur without detection in a world as scrutinized as the royal family? It's a combination of timing, manipulation, and the blind spots inherent in even the most tightly controlled environments. The bodyguard, trusted implicitly, had mastered the subtle art of deception. Every gesture, every excuse, every moment of discretion was calculated to avoid detection, and yet, the accumulation of small missteps created a trail that could not be ignored. And Harry noticed them all. The patterns, the discrepancies, the tiny details that pointed to something far larger than a casual misstep. Over time, these details coalesced into a narrative that was impossible to ignore. And the emotional toll? Immense. Imagine realizing not only that your spouse is betraying you, but that it has happened multiple times, repeatedly, in intimate circumstances. The heartbreak is compounded by the realization that the person meant to protect, to serve, and to be loyal was the very conduit of your pain. Think about the psychological impact. Repeated betrayal wears down trust like water eroding stone. Each incident chips away at the foundation, leaving raw emotional edges exposed. Harry had to process not just the shock but the anger, the sadness, and the deep sense of violation. Every moment, every gesture, every shared memory became tinged with doubt. The palace, a place of centuries-old protocol and tradition, suddenly felt suffocating. The walls that had once symbolized security and privilege now felt like a trap, enclosing him in a reality he could no longer ignore. And yet, there was a strange clarity in the chaos. The repeated betrayals, though devastating, left patterns, and patterns reveal truth. Harry began mapping out the encounters, piecing together timelines, comparing observations, and noticing correlations that others had missed. What looked like chaos on the surface was actually a meticulously orchestrated series of events, a reality hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone perceptive enough to see it. Now, consider the social implications. The repeated betrayals weren't just private. They had the potential to explode into public scandal. Every public appearance, every smile for the cameras, every choreographed moment of affection could be contrasted with the secret encounters, creating a jarring and shocking contradiction. And the stakes were enormous. For Harry, the revelations were personal, yes, but they also had the power to destabilize the carefully maintained image of the monarchy and the public perception of his marriage. And what about the people who noticed but said nothing? Those who had seen hints, glimpses, or odd behavior but chose silence. Their complicity, intentional or not, amplified the impact of each betrayal. The repeated encounters were enabled by the unspoken acknowledgement, the blind spots, and the avoidance of confrontation that often surrounds delicate or high-profile situations. Harry had to navigate not just the emotional aftermath of betrayal, but the tangled web of accountability, loyalty, and deception surrounding it. Ask yourself this. How many layers of deception can a person endure before the weight becomes unbearable? How do you confront repeated betrayal when every action has ramifications, not just personally, but publicly? Harry faced these questions daily, wrestling with emotions that oscillated between rage and sorrow, disbelief and determination. And yet, he had to maintain composure, not just for his own sake, but because of the scrutiny the world would inevitably bring. Every misstep, every emotional reaction could be magnified, twisted, and broadcast globally. And then came the confirmation moments, the undeniable incidents that made it impossible to ignore what had been unfolding for months. Meetings caught out of context, messages accidentally exposed, witnesses who inadvertently provided corroboration. Each piece of evidence, minor on its own, contributed to an overwhelming pattern. And as Harry realized the full extent, the emotional weight became almost unbearable. The betrayal was not a one-time act. It was repeated, intimate, and undeniable. Imagine the complexity of processing that. Not just the personal betrayal, but the understanding that it had occurred multiple times, with deliberate planning and concealment. The emotional impact is exponential. Each revelation builds on the previous one, compounding heartbreak, anger, and disbelief. Harry had to navigate a psychological minefield, balancing the need for evidence with the overwhelming urge to confront, to demand answers, to reclaim some sense of justice and emotional closure. And yet, even as he pieced it all together, there was an unsettling realization. This story was bigger than him. The repeated betrayals had implications that went beyond the marriage, beyond the palace, beyond the personal. It touched the very fabric of trust, loyalty, and reputation. And as Harry prepared for what came next, he understood that exposing the truth would not just change his life, it would shake the world. Because what came next wasn't just about private betrayal. It was about public revelation, about consequences, and about the extraordinary lengths people go to protect appearances even when the truth is staring them in the face. And Harry's next move, his next confrontation, would not only confirm the pattern, but uncover layers of audacity, secrecy, and emotional manipulation that no one could have anticipated. Have you ever had the chilling realization that the truth was hiding in plain sight, waiting for you to notice? For Harry, the evidence wasn't flashy or dramatic at first. It came in fragments, small anomalies, casual mentions, fleeting moments that seemed insignificant at the time. But as anyone who has uncovered betrayal knows, it's never the big, obvious act that hits hardest. It's the accumulation of tiny truths that converge into undeniable reality. And when Harry began connecting the dots, he realized that the facade he had once trusted was nothing more than a carefully orchestrated illusion. The first piece of hidden evidence arrived innocuously, a text message left on a device, seemingly erased, yet partially recovered. It was the kind of detail most people would overlook, but Harry, attuned to the subtleties of human behavior, immediately sensed its importance. A casual phrase, the timing of a response, a reference to a location, all of it suggested something he wasn't supposed to know. He didn't panic immediately. Instead, he cataloged it, compared it to previous anomalies, and slowly, painfully, a pattern emerged. Imagine the emotional complexity of discovering that what you suspected in your heart is now confirmed through cold, undeniable evidence. The mind races. Anger surges. Sadness becomes almost physical. And yet, amidst the turmoil, there's a drive, a determination to uncover the full story, to understand the scope of what has been done behind your back. Harry experienced all of this, layered on top of the exhaustion of living a life constantly scrutinized by cameras, headlines, and public opinion. What made this particular evidence so damning was its consistency with other small but telling observations. He remembered moments that had seemed minor at the time, a sudden change in schedule, a casual excuse that didn't quite make sense, a subtle defensive gesture. Each of these moments, once isolated, could have been dismissed. But viewed in context with the recovered messages and documented encounters, they became a coherent narrative of repeated, intimate betrayal. And then there were the witnesses, those who had seen or heard something unusual but were either unwilling or afraid to speak. Palace staff, distant relatives, and even trusted friends had noticed anomalies over time, but fear, loyalty, or simple disbelief prevented disclosure. Harry, navigating this labyrinth of half-truths and whispered suspicions, had to piece together a mosaic of reality from fragments of testimony and behavior. Each revelation, each confirmation, amplified the emotional stakes. Think about how isolating this must have felt. Being surrounded by people, yet knowing that very few could truly comprehend the scope of what was happening. The betrayal wasn't just personal. It had become an intricate web of secrecy that involved multiple people, small deceptions, and carefully timed actions. Harry was forced to confront not just the infidelity but the orchestration, The way secrecy had been maintained, the way appearances were preserved, and the lengths to which someone would go to hide their repeated transgressions. And the more he uncovered, the more audacious the deception appeared. What started as isolated suspicions evolved into a timeline of interactions that left no room for doubt. The repeated encounters were intentional, carefully planned, and conducted with the awareness that exposure could be disastrous. Harry's emotional turmoil intensified with every discovery, each one a reminder that the betrayal was not a single, isolated incident, but an ongoing, intimate pattern. Now consider the psychological toll. Each piece of evidence doesn't just confirm a suspicion. It changes the way you see every memory, every shared moment, every gesture that once seemed benign. For Harry, this meant reinterpreting years of interaction. Moments that were once sources of joy became tainted with doubt. Trust, once foundational, was eroded by the undeniable proof of repeated, intimate deception. And in the palace, where perception is everything, the emotional weight of this realization was magnified 1,000-fold. And it wasn't just the act itself that was devastating. It was the understanding that it had been hidden in layers so deep, with a cunning that leveraged familiarity, proximity, and access. The bodyguard, someone who had been a constant presence, had used his role to manipulate circumstances, timing, and perception to ensure concealment. Every misstep, every secretive meeting, every whispered interaction was calculated, and the evidence, when fully assembled, left no room for ambiguity. Ask yourself this. If you were in Harry's position, surrounded by a world that assumes perfection, how would you process the evidence of repeated, intimate betrayal? How would you balance the desire for confrontation with the necessity of discretion? How would you survive emotionally while every day reinforces the pattern of deception? These are the challenges Harry faced, amplified by the stakes of fame, expectation, and scrutiny. And yet, amidst the devastation, clarity emerged. The pattern, the timeline, the evidence, it all pointed to a reality that could no longer be denied. The betrayal was deliberate. The encounters were repeated. The emotional weight was undeniable. And Harry, despite the shock and heartbreak, began to understand the full scope of what had been occurring in secret. It was in this period of discovery that Harry realized something even more disturbing. The betrayal wasn't just personal. It had public implications. The repeated encounters, if revealed, would shatter the image of the marriage, disrupt the narrative of the couple's life, and ignite a scandal with global ramifications. The evidence he uncovered was no longer just a private confirmation. It was a ticking bomb, capable of reshaping perceptions, reputations, and relationships forever. And just when he thought he had fully mapped the hidden evidence, a new revelation emerged. Something so shocking, so intimate, that even the pieces he had painstakingly assembled couldn't fully prepare him. It was a moment that demanded immediate attention, a detail that pushed the boundaries of disbelief, and a confirmation that the deception extended beyond what anyone had imagined. The palace, the staff, the enablers, the silent witnesses, all were part of a system that had allowed the facade to persist. But the evidence now stood unflinching, undeniable, and unavoidable. Harry had to confront it, to process it, and to decide how to navigate a world that would never see this reality the way he did. And the emotional stakes were higher than ever, because the repeated betrayals were more than a private scandal. They were a revelation that shook the very foundation of trust, loyalty, and intimacy. Have you ever felt the weight of knowing something devastating, but not yet confronting it? That moment before confrontation is like standing on the edge of a cliff, staring down at a stormy sea, knowing that the leap is inevitable, but fearing the impact. For Harry, that moment arrived with an intensity that few could comprehend. Every piece of evidence, every subtle observation, every whispered hint had led him here, to the brink where words had to be spoken, questions had to be asked, and truths had to be faced. It began with a single conversation. Nothing dramatic, no shouting, just a carefully planned moment to test the waters. Harry approached it cautiously, aware that too much confrontation too soon could backfire, but also knowing that patience had its limits. The first words were measured, deliberate, almost casual. Yet beneath the surface, every tone, every pause, Every reaction was loaded with unspoken implications. The dance of suspicion and revelation had begun. Ask yourself, how do you confront someone when you know they have repeatedly betrayed you? How do you balance anger with the need for clarity? Harry's approach was meticulous. He had cataloged timelines, aligned observations, and reviewed the hidden evidence over and over. Each piece was a question, a challenge, a subtle probe designed to gauge truthfulness, detect evasions, and draw out admissions. The stakes were enormous, not just emotional, but political, public, and familial. The first response was subtle, a flicker in expression, a hesitation that spoke volumes. Harry noticed it instantly. Years of observation, intuition, and experience honed his ability to read micro-expressions, the briefest indicators of concealment. And in that instant, the pieces aligned. The hesitation, the evasion, the carefully curated facade, all confirmed that the betrayal was real, repeated, and deliberate. Emotions surged. Shock, anger, heartbreak, disbelief. They all collided simultaneously. Harry had known something was wrong. He had suspected. But the confirmation brought a visceral intensity that no prior observation could have prepared him for. It was the emotional equivalent of a punch to the chest, leaving you breathless and disoriented, yet painfully aware that the fight had only just begun. And it wasn't just the personal betrayal that hit him. It was the audacity, the methodical repetition, the sheer boldness of conducting intimate encounters under the guise of loyalty. The bodyguard, the person entrusted with protection, had exploited proximity, trust, and duty to conceal repeated acts of intimacy. And in the palace, where appearances are everything, the deception was both a private violation and a public ticking time bomb. Harry's confrontation was layered, deliberate, and psychologically complex. He began with subtle questions, probing for inconsistencies, watching reactions, testing boundaries. Each response revealed new layers of truth, new admissions hidden in plain sight, and new indications that the betrayal was deeper than he had imagined. The emotional stakes escalated with every moment. Every word, every silence, every carefully measured gesture was loaded with meaning, intent, and consequence. But it wasn't just about asking questions. It was about understanding motive, pattern, and context. Harry needed to comprehend how repeated intimate encounters had been orchestrated, why they had persisted, and what mechanisms had enabled concealment. He had to navigate not only his own emotions, but also the psychological strategies employed by the other party: deflection, denial, manipulation, and evasion, all of which are common in deeply entrenched betrayals. Imagine being in Harry's position. Every answer is suspect. Every reaction is analyzed. Every truth is filtered through a lens of prior knowledge and careful observation. The confrontation becomes a mental chess match, where every word carries weight, every silence is significant, and the consequences of miscalculation are catastrophic. This is not merely emotional processing. It is strategic, deliberate, and intensely taxing. And then came the undeniable moment. A slip, a micro-expression, a subtle admission, something so small yet so telling that it confirmed the repeated, intimate betrayal beyond any doubt. In that instant, all of Harry's suspicions, all of the accumulated evidence, all of the hidden observations coalesced into undeniable truth. The facade had fallen completely, and the emotional reality was inescapable. The shock was compounded by realization. This wasn't a single misstep. It wasn't a fleeting mistake. It was a calculated, repeated pattern of intimacy conducted with the awareness of secrecy. The depth of audacity, the manipulation of trust, the sheer repetition of the acts. It was staggering. Harry, despite his composure and experience with high-pressure scrutiny, felt the raw intensity of betrayal coursing through him. Ask yourself this. How would you process the confirmation of repeated, intimate betrayal? How do you reconcile love with deception, trust with manipulation, intimacy with violation? Harry faced all these questions simultaneously, each one demanding a response, each one a test of emotional resilience and strategic thinking. But here's the twist that made this confrontation even more explosive. As Harry probed deeper, he began to uncover evidence that went beyond the immediate betrayal. Details, patterns, and subtle manipulations pointed to a network of complicity silence, and enablers who had allowed the repeated encounters to persist. It wasn't just the act, it was the system of concealment, the orchestration, the audacity of hiding something so intimate in plain sight. And as he processed this, Harry realized the next step was unavoidable. The public narrative, the exposure, the revelation of truth on a scale that would shock the world. The private confrontation had confirmed the repeated betrayals, but the implications were far-reaching. This was no longer just a personal story. It was a scandal with the potential to redefine perception, reputation, and public understanding of a marriage previously deemed perfect. Just when Harry thought he had reached the peak of revelation, an even more shocking layer emerged. An incident, documented and undeniable, that confirmed not just repetition but an intentional strategy to hide the truth, manipulate perception, and exploit proximity for personal gain. It was audacious, intimate, and almost cinematic in its deception. And Harry, despite all his preparation, realized that nothing could have fully prepared him for the emotional and strategic consequences of this discovery. Because here's the truth: confrontation is only the beginning. Understanding the depth, scale, and pattern of repeated betrayal is where the real emotional and psychological work begins. And Harry was about to confront the full scale of what had been hidden in ways that would challenge every assumption he had about loyalty, love, and trust. Have you ever tried to reconstruct a story from fragments, only to realize that the fragments themselves were deliberately misleading? That's exactly what Harry faced as he began piecing together the timeline of deceit. Every interaction, every absence, every whisper of suspicion had to be cataloged, analyzed, and understood in context. The betrayal wasn't random. It had a rhythm, a pattern, a deliberate orchestration that spoke to its audacity and intimacy. And Harry, determined to understand the full scope, embarked on a painstaking reconstruction of events that would expose the truth beyond doubt. The timeline began with subtle moments, seemingly inconsequential but, in retrospect, crucial. A glance here, a fleeting conversation there, a change in routine that at the time felt normal but now revealed a hidden agenda. Harry meticulously documented each incident, cross-referencing notes, recollections, and subtle pieces of evidence. The process was grueling, both emotionally and mentally, because each confirmation of repeated encounters cut deeper than the last. Think about the patience required. It's one thing to suspect betrayal. It's another to build a chronological narrative of deception, tracing repeated acts over time. Harry had to track not only the what and the when, but the how, the why, and the who. Every detail mattered: location, timing, the people present, the excuses offered, and the inconsistencies between words and actions. It was like assembling a jigsaw puzzle, except the pieces were deliberately shaped to mislead, conceal, and manipulate. And then came the moments that couldn't be ignored. Documented encounters, corroborated by accidental witnesses, subtle messages, and overlooked details, began to emerge with alarming clarity. It wasn't just a one-off, it was repeated. The betrayal had a rhythm, almost a cadence, that left Harry reeling. The audacity of conducting intimate acts in plain sight, leveraging proximity and trust, was almost unimaginable. But the evidence was there, undeniable, and increasingly difficult to reconcile with the public image of a perfect marriage. Imagine the psychological impact of assembling this timeline. Each new piece of information acts like a wave, washing over the mind and emotions in succession. Shock, anger, disbelief, sorrow. Each layer of revelation compounds the previous one, creating a turbulent storm of emotional turmoil. And yet, amidst the chaos, clarity emerges. Patterns appear, motivations become discernible, and the repeated nature of the encounters, once subtle, becomes an undeniable hallmark of deliberate betrayal. And it wasn't just the personal dimension that was staggering. The repeated acts, their concealment, and the audacity of hiding them in plain sight had profound public implications. The palace, staff, and those who interacted with the couple were all, unknowingly or unwillingly, part of a web that enabled these acts. The exposure of this timeline would not just confirm betrayal, it would dismantle carefully curated perceptions, challenge assumptions, and ignite questions about loyalty, secrecy, and privilege on a global scale. Harry's reconstruction required a fine balance. He had to be rigorous enough to ensure accuracy while emotionally strong enough to process each revelation without being consumed. The repeated intimate acts, orchestrated with intent, demanded a clear-headed assessment. Who had known? Who had enabled? Who had ignored the signs? And most importantly, how could he confront the central figure without destroying what remained of trust, safety, and dignity? Ask yourself, how would you react if you saw a clear, detailed record of repeated intimate betrayals unfolding over time? How do you confront the truth when it's meticulously documented, when every detail confirms your worst suspicions, and when the stakes include not just your emotional well-being but the perception of the world? Harry faced these questions daily, navigating a complex intersection of emotion, strategy, and survival. The timeline also revealed something chilling. The pattern wasn't random. The encounters were deliberate, carefully timed, and executed with a knowledge of when detection was least likely. It demonstrated a level of audacity and manipulation that elevated the betrayal from personal heartbreak to something far more calculated. And Harry, as he traced the chronology, began to see not just acts of infidelity but a repeated, intimate strategy designed to conceal, manipulate, and exploit trust. The more he pieced together, the more the narrative became impossible to ignore. It wasn't just about betrayal. It was about the orchestration of deceit, the repetition of intimate acts, and the manipulation of proximity and trust over time. Each new revelation in the timeline was like a domino.